What's up, Tesla family? It's Ray J back with another video. And in this, I want to talk about something very important about Tesla stock and what seasonality suggests for the share price moving forward. Just know that I am not a financial planner, so take nothing I'm saying as financial advice. Anyways, when you look at Tesla on the daily time frame, we're showing some weakness right now, and there is a risk of downside if we lose 334, taking us down to 326. But the question is, will Tesla see a bigger correction, or is this just going to be very temporary? I believe that if we do get some kind of corrective phase on Tesla, it's likely going to be short lived, lasting possibly like a month or so. But then once we approach November and December, Tesla will remain more bullish based off what our historical data is telling us. So I want to use this very, very awesome tool known as Forecaster to kind of break down exactly what's going on, to talk about what's happening with Tesla's seasonality and such, to help you guys better understand what's going to likely happen. Because we are looking at some interesting things, at least right now. So what you'll see is that when you look at the price comparison between, Tesla and SPY, there tends to be an interesting correlation. When SPY was bullish, Tesla was also on a very, very nice uptrend. When SPY turned bearish around this is like the start of the year, Tesla also came down, especially with the tariff fears. Then they've been uptrending together, although Tesla's been a little bit lackluster. It's not running as hard because of like earnings and such. It still was holding up quite well as SPY has been rallying. And then if you look at the QQQ next to it, okay, this is the correlation. They were pushing up together, they came down together, they started to push together, but then Tesla started kind of like consolidating, trading sideways before it was starting to slowly uptrend, whereas the QQQ was also uptrending. So my point is, when the QQQ starts to sell off really hard, Tesla tends to do the same thing, at least historically. That's what our data essentially tells us. And I think it's very important to know that, because in case the market does get some kind of correction, that could be a bit more negative for Tesla. Tesla was not the only ticker selling off on Friday. I know Tesla was down 3%, but the whole market came down together as there was profit taking and also negative data that came out. Now, for the time being, the economic data is decent. We're getting a decent CPI according to our reports. The market is still holding up well. Jerome Powell's been talking about a cut, and the market remains more optimistic. But when you look at historical data, just like this, look at the most rocky months of the year. They're August and September. The orange bars are August and the white bars are September. But look at the last 10 to 15 years. What you'll see is that there's been lots of instances where, for example, maybe if we go back like the last 10 years, this becomes more prominent. Back in like 2014, okay, August was green, September was red. Then both August and September were red. We were kind of flat for a couple of years leading up to 2018. And then look at the last couple of years. Okay, check this out. We were red in August and green in September. Then we were green in August, red in September. Green in August, red in September. Red in August, red in September. Red August, red September. Red August, red September. So as you could tell, as of recent, the last 5 to 7 years, the majority of Septembers have been red. And then a lot of the time over the last decade, when you get a green August, you also tend to get a red September. This happened about 4 times. So we're typically red in September. The majority of the time we're red. Look at the last decade, like I said before. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 Septembers we were actually red. It just goes to show how much we tend to be red in September. It tends to be one of the weaker months. Now, does that mean the stock market's going to crash? No, not really. What typically happens is that we get a temporary correction and then we're due for a big bounce towards the end of the year. But we don't really have the catalyst to crash the markets or see some kind of correction. We're still technically in a bull market. This would just create lots of buying opportunities. Now, if there's new tariffs, if there's a war, whatever the catalyst is, we could still come down temporarily. And that is what our charts are suggesting. So if you look at SPY, okay, we're using Forecaster, which is a very awesome tool. And if you guys want to save 10% on your membership, you guys can actually use my link down below to sign up. This is a very awesome tool to look at seasonal data. Look at SPY, okay? The current year is the red line. It has a 91.85% correlation with 5 years ago and a 92.5% correlation with 7 years ago. And what you'll see is that SPY sold off for all the years up until March. Then around April, we formed the bottom. We started to like uptrend. And then between May and August, we tend to be bullish. That's exactly what happened this year. And then what the seasonality shows us is that we start dipping a little bit in September. We bounce by the second week, and the last 2 weeks of September tend to be really, really bearish, especially going into October. And then we start to rally and rally and rally towards the end of the year. So that's what the seasonality suggests on SPY. Okay. On the QQQ, same thing. There's a 90% correlation between the QQQ right now and what we saw 5 years ago. The market sold off really hard for the QQQ approaching March. Then around April, that's when the market started this rally. This year, we finished the sell off around April, and then we started the rally. But notice that May through August was really bullish, and that's exactly what happened so far. And then what happened 5 years ago was we rallied a little bit more. Then we started to dip the first week of September. We bounced a little bit by the second week, and then we started to dump towards the end of September going into October before we saw a monster rally to finish the year. So there's a very, very high correlation right here and a very, very strong possibility we get a very similar move. What else is interesting is that on a monthly basis, sorry, my data is right over here. Tesla tends to be green only 46% of the time in September. And in October, we're only green one third of the time. It's the most bearish month for Tesla. So I would say late September through October might not be too good for Tesla. But then November tends to be the strongest month. We tend to bounce really hard. And then December and January tend to be stronger, at least historically. So far, you guys can actually look at a lot of data, like what does Tesla do each day of August. September also tends to tell us that Tesla is a little weak to start things off. Then we bounced a bit by the second week. Then the last 2 weeks tend to be more volatile. Then October tends to be a lot weaker. October tends to be one of the weakest months of the year for Tesla historically. Fundamentally, Tesla is still doing decent. The average fair value is actually below where we currently are because different analysts have different opinions, but it's still doing well in terms of their growth and such. But one thing you'll see is that it's a very resilient company and it's doing well in terms of that. It's still very, very resilient. When we look at the raw data, though, the data is very, very mixed as of recent. When you look at the quarterly data, there's a lot of like green and red in the balance sheets. Some growth is good, some is bad because of their sales declines. And that's why Tesla may see some volatility very soon. So you want to be very, very careful. So am I saying Tesla's going to crash? Not really. But historically, what else is very interesting is that the QQQ has a perfect, not perfect, but a really nice looking head and shoulders like pattern. This could be indicative of some downside that could be coming, and that could be aligning with the fact that Tesla may also sell off. So this is kind of like a left shoulder. Actually, let me do one thing real quick before I draw this out. Let me just zoom out a little bit so I can draw this out and forecast this. This is like our left shoulder. This is like a head. And then this could be like a right shoulder on the QQQ. Maybe we bounce a little bit next week, then we start dipping and we start breaking structure. Of course, we have to watch for confirmation. I do want to say it's best to watch the chart in real time and follow the trend. But I'm just saying that we have a perfect head and shoulders with all this data that suggests that September happens to be more bearish, even October. And then maybe by the second, the last 2 weeks of September, we start to sell off more hard. And then we see a big dump going into October before we form a bottom. And then we start a monster rally going into October, heading into November. Then we start like a big recovery move, right? And then we break all-time highs again. Like that's what I'm essentially talking about, right? These dips would be some good buying opportunities. When you look at the QQQ, for example, not the daily, but I think it's better to look at the 4 hour to see this. There is this gap over here around 553, so we could easily dip to the 550s or below, and the head and shoulders looks very strong. But think about it. What if the head and shoulders plays out for the QQQ? Well, my SPY chart's over here. Sorry about that, guys. SPY also has a triple bearish divergence, and there is a divergence between SPY and the QQQ. SPY is breaking all-time highs, but the QQQ isn't. We need to break confirmation data on SPY for that to happen. We need the confirmation. If we end up losing 640 soon, we could be looking for a temporary sell-off. Maybe we bounce a bit, then by the final 2 weeks of September, we start to dip, and we could be looking for that gap fill. It's possible that that's going to be dipping as well because SPY and the QQQ have been moving very similarly. They have a very, very high correlation with one another. So, if the QQQ is selling off, if SPY starts to sell off in like mid to late September going into October, there's a high probability that Tesla might be following that trend, and Tesla could also see a temporary correction. Now, it doesn't have to be a crash. It might just be a temporary move down. I want to make a very important distinction about that. Just a temporary sell-off would be very, very healthy for Tesla. We'll see how low we go. I still feel like the chart is still bullish overall, but this might sell off to the low 300s or even below. We might temporarily dip on Tesla into September. It depends on earnings and such, but then if we do get some kind of sell off in like the 290s or below, even if we come down to fill some of these gaps, it's a very, very good opportunity to start loading up on shares, because once we finish this sell off, then Tesla's going to be looking for a monster rally to finish the year, and we could start to rally once again towards all-time highs. A structure like this is possible on Tesla, just hypothetically, if the market does get some kind of correction. We have to wait for confirmation to see if Tesla loses 325 and eventually the 320s. So I'm not making promises about this, but this is a possibility to be prepared for in case we get some kind of correction in the markets in, I would say, the second half of September going into October. But once again, if we do correct, it's going to be another buying opportunity. So it might be coming very, very soon. So I hope that's as clear as possible. Our data does suggest there might be a correction coming on the QQQ and SPY in September/October. And then if that's the case, maybe Tesla tries to hold up for some time, but it does typically correct in October. It could even start correcting a bit earlier this year. We'll see about that. But historically, October is the weakest month of the year for Tesla. And I would be looking to be buying a lot of shares, buying the dips in October, because then we get ready for a rally in November, December. All right. So with that being said, I thank you all so much for listening. I want to make this video very short. If we get a big correction, do not fret, do not fear, do not panic. It's going to be a buying opportunity, an opportunity to finally get those Tesla shares for cheap. That is what could be coming. So please keep that in mind. I'm just here to give you guys a warning about that based off what the historical data tells us. Forecasters are very, very awesome tool for looking at data. So if you want to see what's happening with Tesla's seasonality, if you want to see what's happening with Tesla's fundamentals, looking at their balance sheets, what's the fair value of Tesla, what are the politicians doing with Tesla? You can actually see some data on that. What are politicians doing? What's happening so far? You guys can see lots of very, very useful data. What's the PE ratio looking like? What's Tesla's net income? What are insiders doing? Are they buying Tesla? Are they selling? So I'm just trying to tell you guys, you have access to all this awesome data, which could be very beneficial for trading. We don't really have a sell rating on Tesla yet using our DPO indicator, which tells us if we're overbought or oversold, and it tells us if we're about to see a sell signal. We're not really there yet, but it could develop. So I just want to give you guys a warning about that. And if it does happen, remember, see this as an opportunity, see this as a blessing. Do not look at the market as a curse. Everything that happens is an opportunity, whether the market's running or if the market's about to pull back. It's always an opportunity. So keep your guys' heads together. Anyways, that's it for this video. If you guys want to save 10% on Forecaster, please check out my link down below to get these benefits. If you want to be able to look at Tesla and know when is it a good time to be buying shares or selling, or selling up here, buying, if you want all these indicators, this could be very, very useful. So if you guys want to check out my link down below for your 10% coupon, you guys could do that. With that being said, I'll see you guys very soon in the next video. Thank you for listening, and peace out.